With savings accounts actually paying you something these days, it's natural to want to hold on to a little bit more cash than you would otherwise. But while it's rightfully comforting to hold on to an adequate amount of cash for your situation, there are a few costs to be aware of if you find yourself wanting to hold on to more cash than you really need. My name is Bryan Minogue, founder of Cardinal Financial, and in this video, I'm going to explain three costs: inflation, taxes, and opportunity costs to consistently holding on to too much cash. The first cost of holding on to too much cash is inflation. Historically, cash rates have barely outpaced inflation, and in the last 25 years, savings accounts have actually lost purchasing power when you consider the impact of inflation. Here's a long-term view of savings account rates compared to inflation, or CPI. Since 1985, cash has averaged about 3.8% annually, while inflation has averaged around 2.3%. However, the vast majority of this excess return from cash came in the period before 2000. Since then, cash has meaningfully lagged behind the rate of inflation. So while the interest rate on your savings account, which in today's environment is hopefully around 4%, while that may appear attractive, it must be viewed in the context of inflation. And historically, cash rates and inflation have been fairly similar. However, these comparisons are before considering the impact of taxes, the second cost to be aware of. Taxable interest from a bank account is reported at tax time on line 2B of your Form 1040. This interest is subject to ordinary income taxes, including federal and state taxes. For a middle-income household at the 22% federal tax bracket, a 4% savings account rate is closer to 3% after taxes. So that loss of purchasing power for cash since 2000 after the impact of inflation is even worse when you consider the impact of taxes. The third cost to consider if you're holding on to too much cash is opportunity cost. This opportunity cost is the potentially higher returns you miss out on by holding on to cash instead of investing. Over time, investment markets are expected to outperform cash. Otherwise, why would anyone invest? And we can see over the last nearly 30 years, the returns of stocks, bonds, and gold compared to cash. Each of these individual asset classes has significantly outperformed both cash and inflation. However, of course, time horizon matters. It's not as simple as investing and outperforming cash. Each of these individual asset classes have been subject to massive drawdowns and long underwater periods. When we look at this nearly 30-year time horizon, each of these individual asset classes has had a 7-year stretch with negative returns, and both stocks and gold have had 10-year periods with negative nominal returns. But if instead of investing only in one asset class, you invested in a diversified mix of these assets, then you would have experienced far less severe drawdowns, shortened your underwater periods, and had a much higher batting average compared to cash. A well-diversified, risk-parity style portfolio has historically had a much higher batting average compared to cash than any one individual asset. This type of investment portfolio has outperformed cash in the vast majority of 3-year periods, and its worst 3-year stretch was a negative 0.5% annualized return. Not bad when you compare that to the worst stretches for stocks, negative 17% a year, bonds, negative 5% a year, and gold, negative 15% a year over their worst 3-year stretches. And an investor's odds only improve as you stretch the time horizon to 5 years and beyond. What this means is if you have a time horizon of 3 years or more, there's an argument to be made to invest in a well-diversified portfolio instead of holding that in cash. So while savings account rates of 4 to 5% sound attractive, especially compared to where rates have been in the last decade, it's important to right-size your cash balance and not overly expose yourself to the deleterious effects of inflation and taxes, while also missing out on the potential upside of other investments.